The cargo hauler spun wildly through space as debris tore through its hull. Dennis Wade gripped the control panel until his knuckles turned white, desperately trying to stabilize the dying ship. Red warning lights flooded the cockpit, while alarms screamed warnings he already knew. 3 fuel lines ruptured, oxygen leaking from the port side, engines failing one by one. His route through the outer rim had seemed safe enough according to the star charts, but those charts did not account for fresh debris fields from recent conflicts. The ship shuddered violently as another piece of twisted metal punched through the cargo bay. Dennis cursed and redirected all remaining power to the forward thrusters, aiming for the nearest planet. Any landing he could walk away from was a good landing, his old flight instructor used to say. He hoped that wisdom held true for crash landings on unmarked hostile worlds. Gravity took hold of the crippled vessel and pulled it down through thick gray clouds. Dennis fought the controls as atmospheric friction turned the hull into a screaming fireball. Trees and rocky terrain rushed up to meet him faster than he wanted. The impact threw him against his restraints hard enough to knock the air from his lungs. Metal shrieked as the ship carved a trench through alien soil, throwing up clouds of purple dust. Then everything went silent except for the hiss of escaping gas and the groan of cooling metal. Dennis unbuckled himself with shaking hands and checked for injuries. Bruised ribs, possibly cracked. His left shoulder throbbed where the restraint had dug in. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye. Nothing fatal, but everything hurt. He grabbed the emergency kit from under his seat and stumbled toward the exit hatch. The mechanism was jammed, so he kicked it repeatedly until it finally popped open with a hiss of equalized pressure. The air outside tasted strange, metallic with an underlying bitterness. 2 suns hung in a purple sky, casting long shadows across a barren landscape, dotted with twisted rock formations. No signs of civilization, no distress beacon responses, nothing but silence and desolation. Dennis activated his personal beacon and hoped someone friendly would pick up the signal before someone hostile did. His hope died exactly 4 hours later when the ships appeared overhead. They were not rescue vessels. Black angular craft descended in a predatory formation, their weapons ports clearly visible even from ground. Dennis tried to run, but the open terrain offered nowhere to hide. Armored figures dropped from the ships on anti-gravity platforms, surrounding him within seconds. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in segmented armor that reminded Dennis of insect carapaces. Reptilian faces with cold yellow eyes studied him like scientists examining a new specimen. One of them spoke in a harsh, clicking language. Dennis raised his hands slowly to show he was unarmed. Another alien produced a small device and pressed it against his neck. Pain exploded through his nervous system and the world went dark. When consciousness returned, Dennis found himself in a cage barely large enough to stand in. The metal floor vibrated with the hum of engines. Through the bars, he could see other cages holding various alien creatures, some sleeping, others pacing nervously. A few stared at him with eyes that held too much intelligence for simple animals. He was on a ship, being transported somewhere, and the destination probably was not good. The journey lasted 3 days according to his internal clock. They fed him twice with gray paste that tasted like cardboard mixed with dirt but kept him alive. No one spoke to him or explained anything. The other prisoners seemed resigned to their fate, which terrified Dennis more than the capture itself. The ship finally docked with a loud clang that echoed through the hold. Rough hands dragged Dennis from his cage and shoved him down a corridor lined with rust and grime. The sounds of a massive crowd grew louder with each step. Roaring voices in dozens of languages, the smell of unwashed bodies and spilled alcohol, the electric atmosphere of bloodlust barely contained. They pushed him through a gate into blinding light. Dennis shielded his eyes and slowly took in his surroundings. He stood in the center of an enormous circular arena, sand covering the ground beneath his feet. Thousands of alien spectators filled the stands, rising up on all sides, their faces twisted with anticipation and cruelty. Holographic displays floated above the crowd, showing his image in text and languages he could not read. A booming voice echoed across the arena, amplified by hidden speakers. A massive reptilian figure stood in an elevated box, arms spread wide in theatrical gesture. This must be the one in charge, the ringleader of whatever nightmare Dennis had fallen into. The crowd roared in response to the speech, some laughing, others making sounds that could only be jeers and insults. Dennis did not need a translation to understand the situation. This was a fighting arena, and he was about to become entertainment. The holographic displays changed to show a monstrous creature covered in black scales with 6 limbs ending in curved claws. Numbers appeared next to the image, probably betting odds. The crowd grew frenzied as more bets were placed. Across the arena, massive gates began to slowly grind open. Darkness filled the gap between them. Something moved in that darkness, something huge. A low growl rolled across the sand like distant thunder. The crowd fell silent in anticipation. Dennis felt his heart hammering against his bruised ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The arena walls rose 30 feet high and guards lined the top with weapons ready. The creature stepped into the light, and the crowd exploded with noise. It was even larger than the hologram had shown, easily 12 feet long, with a muscular body built for killing. Multiple eyes focused on Dennis with predatory intelligence. Scars covered its scales, evidence of countless previous battles. This was the arena champion, the executioner, and Dennis Wade was its next victim. The gates slammed shut behind the beast with a finality that crushed any hope of escape. The creature circled Dennis slowly, claws digging furrows in the sand with each step. Its multiple eyes tracked every tiny movement he made, calculating, assessing. The crowd noise faded to background static as Dennis focused entirely on survival. This thing had killed hundreds of fighters according to those holographic displays. Warriors from species bred for combat had died screaming in this arena. What chance did a cargo pilot from Earth have? Dennis forced himself to breathe slowly and observe rather than panic. The beast favored its right side when it moved. The rear left limb touched the ground carefully, suggesting old injury or chronic pain. Scars crisscrossed its scales in patterns that spoke of torture more than battle. Burns marked its hide where shock weapons had been used repeatedly. This creature was not just a killer. It was a prisoner too, broken and brutalized until only rage remained. The Ravager stopped circling and reared up on its hind legs, displaying its full, terrifying height. It roared, a sound that vibrated through Dennis's chest and made his ears ring. The crowd roared back, hungry for blood. But Dennis noticed something crucial. The creature had not attacked yet. It was posturing, establishing dominance the way predators did on Earth. Testing to see if the prey would run or fight, Dennis did neither. He slowly lowered himself to sit cross-legged on the sand. His grandfather had taught him about dangerous animals during those long summers in the Australian outback. Never run from a predator. Never show fear through body language. Make yourself small and non-threatening. Sometimes the animal would lose interest. Sometimes it would attack anyway. But running guaranteed death. The Ravager tilted its massive head, confusion evident in the way its multiple eyes focused and refocused on this strange prey. Creatures in the arena always ran or fought. This human did neither. It just sat there, meeting the beast's gaze without challenging it. The crowd fell quiet, confused by the lack of immediate violence. From his elevated box, the arena master Gresh leaned forward with interest. This was unexpected. He barked orders in his clicking language, and handlers below scrambled to obey. One of them activated a control device, and the Ravager suddenly shrieked in pain. Electricity coursed through the shock collar buried in its scales. The crowd cheered as the beast was jolted into aggressive action. The Ravager charged with terrible speed. Dennis threw himself sideways at the last possible second, rolling through the sand. Claws raked the ground where he had been sitting, gouging deep trenches. The beast spun faster than something that large should be able to move and lunged again. Dennis scrambled backward, his hand closing around a bone fragment half buried in the sand. Not much a weapon, but better than nothing. The creature came at him a third time. Dennis waited until it committed to the attack, then threw the bone hard to his left. The Ravager's eyes tracked the movement automatically, and its momentum carried it in that direction. It crashed into one of the metal drainage grates set into the arena floor, the impact jarring its already injured limb. The beast roared in pain and frustration. Dennis used the moment to put distance between them, moving toward a pile of rocks near the arena wall. His mind raced through options. He could not outrun this thing. He could not outfight it. The only advantage he had was his brain. Humans had not conquered Earth by being the strongest or fastest. They had survived by being clever and adaptable. The Ravager recovered and stalked toward him more carefully now. It had learned the human was trickier than expected. Good. If it was learning, it was thinking. Thinking meant intelligence. Intelligence meant potential for communication, for understanding. The crowd was growing restless, some shouting for action while others seemed fascinated by this bizarre dance between human and monster. Handlers tossed something into the arena. A chunk of rotted meat splashed onto the sand between Dennis and the Ravager. Standard practice according to the worn stains on the arena floor. The meat was supposed to drive the beast into a feeding frenzy, make it attack with mindless hunger. Dennis saw the creature's eyes fix on the food. It was starving. The visible ribs beneath scarred scales told that story clearly, but Dennis did not try to take the meat. He did not move toward it or try to use it as bait. Instead, he slowly pushed it with his foot toward the Ravager. The gesture was small but clear. The food was for the beast, not him. He was not competing for resources. The creature watched this action with what Dennis swore was surprise. It snapped up the meat in one bite, but did not immediately attack afterward. Instead, it sat back on its haunches and studied the human with those multiple eyes. Gresh shouted something angry from his box. This was not going according to plan. The crowd was divided now. Some aliens demanded blood immediately, while others leaned forward with genuine curiosity. How long could the human survive? What would happen next? This was different from a usual carnage, and some found that difference intriguing. The arena master activated more systems. Energy barriers suddenly flickered to life around the perimeter, herding both Dennis and the Ravager toward the center. The space grew smaller and smaller, forcing them into close proximity. The crowd roared approval. Now the real fight would begin. There was nowhere left to run. Dennis and the Ravager stood 10 feet apart in a circle barely 20 feet across. The beast's breath came in heavy snorts. Its claws flexed in the sand. Dennis could see every scar, every burn, every sign of abuse inflicted on this creature. He made a decision then that probably meant his death, but felt right anyway. He sat down again, crossing his legs and placing his hands palm up on his knees. Universal body language for peaceful intent. The Ravager watched him for a long moment. Then, to the shock of everyone in the arena, it slowly lowered itself to the ground as well. Not in a crouch ready to pounce, but in a resting position, exhausted from years of forced combat and starvation. The two prisoners, human and beast, faced each other in stillness while thousands of spectators held their breath. Dennis kept his breathing steady and his movements minimal. The Ravager watched him with an intensity that suggested deep thought rather than simple animal instinct. Its scarred hide rose and fell with each breath. Up close, Dennis could see the shock collar more clearly now. Crude wires dug into the creature's flesh, causing constant low-level pain. Small wonder it had become so vicious after years of such treatment. He slowly raised one hand, keeping his movements telegraphed and obvious. The creature tensed, but did not attack. Dennis pointed first to his own neck, then to the collar buried in the Ravager's scales. He repeated the gesture several times, trying to communicate shared suffering. Both of them were prisoners here. Both of them were being hurt. The beast's multiple eyes followed his hand movements closely. A low rumble came from the creature's throat. Not a growl exactly, more like a questioning sound. Dennis took that as encouragement and continued. He spoke in a low, calm voice, even though the words meant nothing to the alien predator. Tone mattered more than content when dealing with frightened animals. He had learned that with the wild dogs back home. And with his neighbor's abused rescue horse that only responded to patience and kindness, the crowd had grown eerily quiet. Even the rowdiest spectators seemed transfixed by what was happening. The holographic displays showed split betting odds. Half the arena now wagered the human would survive the full rotation. The other half still expected death, but the time estimates had grown longer. Gresh paced in his observation box, mandibles clicking in agitation. This was supposed to be a quick execution, not whatever bizarre spectacle was unfolding. The arena master's patience snapped. He barked orders at his handlers, and another gate ground open at the far end of the arena. The crowd perked up immediately, excited by this escalation. Dennis turned to see what new horror was being released, and his stomach dropped. A sleek predator emerged from the darkness, built like a greyhound mixed with a mantis. It moved with liquid grace on 6 thin legs, its triangular head swiveling to scan the arena. This was a Shrieker according to the holographic displays that updated with new information. A pack hunter designed to chase down fast prey. The Shrieker locked onto Dennis immediately. Its creator had programmed it to target the weakest available prey, and the human fit that description perfectly. It charged across the sand with terrifying speed. Dennis tried to run, but knew he could not outpace this thing. It would be on him in seconds. His cargo pilot training had not included lessons on fighting alien predators that a massive black shape intercepted the Shrieker mid-charge. The Ravager slammed into the smaller predator with the force of an avalanche, sending both creatures tumbling through the sand. The crowd erupted in surprised shouts. The Ravager had defended the human, protected the very prey it was supposed to kill. This was unprecedented in the arena's violent history. The two predators separated and began circling each other. The Shrieker was faster and more agile, but the Ravager had size and power on its side. They clashed again in a flurry of claws and teeth. The Shrieker darted in to slash at exposed flanks before dancing away from retaliatory strikes. The Ravager absorbed damage while landing crushing blows whenever the smaller creature got too close. Dennis realized he could not just stand there. The Ravager was fighting to protect him, but it was already wounded and exhausted. He needed help somehow. His eyes scanned the arena floor for anything useful. Rocks, bones, sand. Not much to work with. But humans had conquered worlds with less that he grabbed a handful of sand and waited for his moment. When the Shrieker circled toward him during its rapid movement pattern, Dennis threw the sand directly at its face. The alien predator shrieked as particles got into its multiple eyes, temporarily blinding it. The Ravager took advantage instantly, catching the Shrieker with a devastating strike that sent it sprawling. Dennis grabbed a bone fragment and moved to flank the smaller predator. When it tried to recover, he jabbed at its eyes again, aiming for vulnerable spots. The Shrieker snapped at him, but its movements were uncoordinated now. The Ravager closed in from the other side, and together they pressed their advantage. Human cunning combined with raw alien power proved overwhelming. The Shrieker made one last desperate lunge at Dennis, but the Ravager intercepted it. Massive jaws closed around the smaller predator's neck and ended the fight with a single crushing bite. The Shrieker went limp, and the Ravager dropped its body contemptuously to the sand. Silence fell across the arena. Then chaos erupted. Half the crowd roared approval, while the other half shouted in anger. Bets had been won and lost on outcomes nobody had predicted. Gresh stood frozen in his box, clearly unsure how to proceed. The human and the Ravager had just demonstrated cooperation, intelligence, and tactical thinking. This changed everything. The Ravager limped back to where Dennis stood. Fresh wounds leaked dark blood onto its scales. The fight had costed dearly. Dennis approached slowly, and the creature lowered its head, allowing him to examine the injuries. He tore strips from his jumpsuit and began binding the worst cuts. His hand shook, but he worked carefully, using field medicine training from his cargo hauler days when ships sometimes went weeks between port stops. The Ravager made that rumbling sound again, softer this time. Dennis could have sworn it sounded almost grateful. He found a particularly painful-looking wound near the creature's shoulder joint and applied gentle pressure while wrapping it. The beast leaned into his touch, seeking relief from constant pain for perhaps the first time in years. The crowd watched in fascinated silence as human and predator worked together in the aftermath of battle. Some of the spectators began making new bets. Others called for immediate execution of both prisoners before things got further out of hand. Gresh finally moved, gesturing to his handlers. Energy barriers deactivated and the arena floor opened to reveal fresh sand covering the blood and bodies. A voice boomed across the speakers in multiple languages. The translation devices embedded in the arena systems made the meaning clear even to Dennis. The arena master was making an announcement. One final challenge. If the human and his beast could survive what came next, they would earn their freedom. The crowd roared approval. Dennis looked at the Ravager and saw intelligence looking back at him. They both knew the truth. Freedom was a lie. They were too valuable now as entertainment. But they had proven something important today. They had proven that different species could work together, could communicate, could become something stronger than either was alone. 3 days passed before the promised final challenge. They kept Dennis and the Ravager separated during that time, locked in adjacent cages where they could see but not touch each other. Guards watched constantly to ensure no communication happened. But they underestimated human creativity. Dennis used hand signals during feeding times, simple gestures that the intelligent creature began to understand and repeat. Point to self meant Dennis. Tap chest meant the Ravager, which Dennis had started calling red in his mind after the rust color markings on its scales. Together, they developed a basic vocabulary of danger, food, and trust. The arena was packed when they finally brought both prisoners back to the sand. Every seat filled with spectators from across the sector who had heard tales of the human who befriended the unkillable beast. Gambling systems crashed from a volume of bets being placed. Gresh milked the moment for all it was worth, his amplified voice building anticipation to a fever pitch before revealing what came next. 5 gates opened simultaneously. From each emerged a convicted criminal sentenced to death through arena combat. But these were not helpless victims. They were warriors from species bred for battle. A massive armored brute with 4 arms stood 9 feet tall, each limb ending in blade-like claws. A serpentine fighter moved with liquid grace, its scales shifting colors to blend with surroundings. A hulking creature covered in rock-like plating carried a massive club fashioned from bone and metal. 2 identical insectoid warriors clicked mandibles in synchronized patterns, clearly used to fighting as a coordinated unit. All 5 carried weapons and armor, giving them enormous advantages over 1 human in torn clothing and 1 injured predator. The crowd roared approval. This would be the greatest spectacle in arena history. Either the human and his beast would die spectacularly, or they would achieve the impossible. Either outcome meant profit for the arena and glory for Gresh. Dennis met Red's multiple eyes across the sand. They had minutes at most before the fight began. He pointed to the serpentine fighter and made a slashing motion, then pointed to himself. Red rumbled understanding. Dennis would focus on the fast opponent while Red handled the heavy hitters. They both knew this was suicide, but neither showed fear. If they were going to die, they would die fighting together. The arena master dropped his hand, and the battle exploded into motion. The 4-armed warrior charged immediately, clearly intending to end things quickly with overwhelming force. Red met it head-on, and the collision shook the arena floor. The 2 giants grappled, claws against blades, raw power against brutal efficiency. The rock-plated fighter moved to support its ally, raising its club for a crushing strike. Dennis did not watch the rest. The serpentine creature was already on him, scales flickering through colors as it tried to disorient its prey. It moved like water, impossible to predict or track. Dennis threw himself sideways as fangs snapped where his neck had been. He rolled through the sand and came up with a rock in each hand. Not much, but better than nothing. The serpent struck again, and Dennis threw 1 rock at its head. The creature dodged easily, but the move gave Dennis time to retreat toward the arena wall. He needed to control the fight's location, use the environment to his advantage. The serpent followed, confident in its superior speed and weapons. It did not see the drainage grate until Dennis let it directly onto the metal surface. The creature's scales found no purchase on the smooth metal, and it slipped. Dennis did not waste the opportunity. He smashed his remaining rock down on the serpent's skull with all his strength. Once, twice, 3 times before it recovered enough to coil away, clearly dazed. He pressed the attack, staying mobile, never letting the creature regain full balance. His cargo pilot days had involved bar fights on rougher stations. He knew how to handle himself in close combat, even if the opponent was not human. Red was fighting 2 enemies at once and losing ground. The 4-armed warrior had superior reach, and the rock-plated creature shrugged off most damage. But Red was smart and battle-scarred from years in the arena. It gave ground strategically, keeping both opponents in front rather than letting them flank. When the club wielder overextended on a massive swing, Red darted in under the blow and grabbed the creature's arm in its jaws. The crunch of breaking bone echoed across the arena. The insectoid twins moved as one unit, trying to surround Dennis while he fought the serpent. He spotted them coming and made a snap decision. Sometimes the best defense was a crazy offense. He charged directly at the twins instead of away, surprising them with the aggressive move. They raised their weapons, but Dennis slid through the gap between them in the sand, too low and fast for their strikes to connect. Now behind the twins, Dennis grabbed a discarded blade from earlier fights half buried in the sand. The weapon felt awkward in his grip, but he adapted quickly. When one twin turned to face him, he threw the blade like a spear. It caught the creature in the joint between head and thorax, not killing it, but causing enough damage to slow its movement significantly. Red roared and Dennis recognized it as a call for help. The 4-armed warrior had pinned a Ravager against the arena wall and was raining down blows faster than Red could block. Dennis sprinted across the sand, knowing he was too small and weak to face such a monster directly. But humans did not win by being strong. They won by being clever. He leaped onto the warrior's back and grabbed its eyes with both hands, digging his thumbs into the soft tissue. The creature shrieked and reared backward, trying to dislodge the human. Red seized the moment and surged forward, catching the warrior's leg in its powerful jaws. Together, they brought the giant down. The serpent was recovering, shaking off the effects of Dennis's earlier strikes. The remaining insectoid twin moved to support it. The rock-plated creature still fought despite its broken arm, swinging the massive club one-handed. This was far from over, and both Dennis and Red bled from multiple wounds. But they had proven something crucial. Working together, they were more than the sum of their parts. The 4-armed warrior was down, but not dead. It thrashed weakly as Red held it pinned. Dennis spotted the energy blade strapped to the creature's belt and grabbed it quickly. The weapon hummed to life in his hand, feeling more balanced than he expected. He had exactly 0 training with alien technology, but desperation made for a quick teacher. The blade cut through the warrior's armor like it was nothing, and the giant stopped moving. The serpentine fighter had recovered and struck at Dennis from behind. Red's roar gave him split-second warning. He spun and brought the energy blade up in a defensive arc, catching the serpent mid-strike. The blade carved through scales, and the creature recoiled with a shriek of pain. It was not a killing blow, but it bought precious time. The insectoid twin with the blade still embedded in its neck collapsed suddenly, its strange alien biology finally giving out. That left 3 opponents, the injured serpent, the remaining twin, and the rock-plated brute still swinging its club despite a shattered arm. Better odds than before, but still not good. Dennis was running on adrenaline and stubbornness at this point. His body had more bruises than unmarked skin. Red limped toward him, and they took up defensive positions back to back. The remaining enemies circled warily. They had seen the human and beast work together now. Underestimating them had cost lives. The serpent flickered through colors rapidly, trying to hypnotize its prey. Dennis looked away from the pattern and focused on its shadow instead. Old trick his grandfather taught him for dealing with venomous snakes. The insectoid twin made its move first, rushing in with mandibles spread wide. Red caught it with a devastating strike from its heavy tail, sending the creature flying through the air to crash against the arena wall. It did not get up again. Two left. The crowd had gone from bloodthirsty cheering to awed silence. Nobody had expected the human and predator to survive this long, much less win. Gresh stood in his observation box, mandibles clicking in patterns that suggested deep agitation. This was not how arena battles were supposed to go. The house always won. The condemned always died. That was the natural order. But this human was rewriting rules that had stood for decades. Other species in the stands began talking among themselves, pointing at Dennis, reassessing their understanding of humans in general. The rock-plated brute charged with its club raised high. Dennis dove left, while Red went right, splitting the creature's attention. The club smashed into sand where Dennis had been standing, hitting with enough force to crack the arena floor. Before the brute could recover, Red was on its back, all six limbs finding purchase in the joints between stone plates. The creature spun and bucked, but could not dislodge the Ravager. Dennis saw his opening. He ran forward and drove the energy blade upward through the gap in armor under the brute's jaw. The giant staggered, dropped its club, and crashed to the sand face first. Red leaped clear just before the impact would have crushed its legs. Only the serpent remained. It had been watching, learning, waiting for the right moment. Now it struck with everything it had, moving faster than Dennis could track. Fangs sank into his shoulder, and venom burned through his veins like liquid fire. Dennis screamed and slashed wildly with the blade. The serpent released him and darted away, but Red was already moving. The Ravager caught the serpent mid-retreat. There was no mercy in what happened next. Red's multiple eyes held cold fury as it systematically tore the creature apart. This was personal now. The serpent had hurt Red's human, the one creature that had shown it kindness in this place of pain. The crowd fell utterly silent as they witnessed the Ravager's protective rage. When it was over, Red returned to Dennis, who had collapsed to his knees. The venom was spreading fast, turning his veins black under the skin. His vision blurred at the edges. He tried to speak, but his tongue felt thick and useless. Red pressed its massive head against Dennis's chest, rumbling in distress. The arena doors burst open and guards rushed in with weapons raised. Gresh was shouting orders to capture them both alive. They were too valuable to kill now. The crowd had fallen in love with the story of human and beast. This partnership had become legendary in a single afternoon. But Dennis was dying, and Red would not leave his side to fight. Then something unexpected happened. A portion of the crowd began throwing objects into the arena. Not weapons, but medical supplies. Syringes, bandages, anti-venom kits from various species. Some spectators were betting on Dennis to survive. Others simply wanted the story to continue. A few had been moved by the genuine bond between human and predator and refused to see it end this way. Red looked at the supplies scattered in the sand, then at the approaching guards. It made a decision, grabbing Dennis by his torn jumpsuit. The Ravager began dragging him toward the medical supplies, while keeping its body between the human and the guards. Energy weapons discharged, but Red's thick scales absorbed most of the damage. It would not let them take Dennis. Not now. Not ever. Dennis felt himself being moved, but could barely process what was happening. The venom had nearly reached his heart. His breathing came in shallow gasps. Through fading vision, he saw Red standing over him protectively, saw the guards hesitating, saw something flying through the air toward them. An anti-venom injector crashed into the sand near his hand, that a voice in the crowd shouted something in a language Dennis did not know. But the translation system caught it and broadcast the meaning to everyone. The voice was telling Red how to use the injector. Other voices joined in, creating a chorus of instruction. Some of these aliens had seen humans before, knew their biology, wanted to help. The crowd had turned against the arena master. Red looked at the injector, looked at Dennis, then at the shouting spectators. Understanding dawned in its multiple eyes. The creature picked up the injector carefully in its massive claws and pressed it against Dennis's neck the way the voices instructed. The anti-venom flooded his system and the burning began to fade. Gresh screamed orders, but the guards had stopped advancing. They feared what the crowd might do if they killed the human now. This had transformed from an execution into something else entirely. A revolution of hearts and minds happening in real time. Dennis's vision cleared slowly as the antivenom worked through his system. The burning in his veins faded to a dull ache. He could breathe again without feeling like knives were stabbing his lungs. Red stood over him like a guardian statue, daring anyone to approach. The guards maintained their distance, weapons raised, but fingers off triggers. The crowd had grown from supportive to actively hostile toward Gresh. Throwing medical supplies had become throwing insults and trash at the arena master's observation box. Dennis forced himself to stand on shaking legs. Red immediately positioned itself to provide support. They had won. They had survived the impossible challenge. But as Dennis looked at the sealed arena gates and the armed guards, he realized something his grandfather had told him years ago. Winning a fight and getting out alive were two different things. Gresh would never let them leave. They were too profitable, too famous now. The arena master would stage bigger battles, more spectacular challenges, until eventually they died for entertainment, but a riot was starting in the stands. Different alien species arguing and shoving each other over what should happen next. Some demanded the human and beast be freed as promised. Others wanted more battles to continue the greatest story in arena history. A few called for Gresh's head for breaking the sacred rules of arena combat. The guards were distracted, looking nervously at the crowd rather than their prisoners. Dennis noticed something crucial. The control booth for the arena systems sat 30 feet above the floor, accessible by a metal stairway. That booth controlled the gates, the barriers, the shock collars, everything. If he could reach it, he might be able to free not just himself and Red, but all the other creatures imprisoned here. It was an insane plan with almost zero chance of success. He looked at Red and saw intelligence looking back at him. The creature understood. They were thinking the same thing that he pointed at the control booth, and Red rumbled agreement. They moved together, still covering each other like they had during the battle. The guard shouted warnings, but did not fire. Too many spectators had surged down to the lower levels, creating a chaotic buffer between the arena floor and the security forces. Dennis and Red reached the stairs and started climbing. Halfway up, Gresh appeared in front of them. The arena master had descended from his observation box with a personal energy weapon in his clawed hands. His mandibles clicked patterns of pure fury. This human had destroyed everything. The natural order, the profit margins, the reputation of the arena. Gresh raised the weapon and fired. Red took the shot meant for Dennis, the energy bolt scorching scales along its flank. The Ravager roared in pain, but did not stop moving. It crashed into Gresh with the weight of years of abuse and rage behind the impact. The arena master's weapon went flying over the railing. The two giants grappled on the narrow stairs, fighting for dominance. Red was wounded and exhausted, but fighting for freedom. Gresh was fresh, but fighting for pride. Dennis squeezed past them and reached the control booth. The systems were labeled in alien languages, but he had been a cargo hauler pilot for 15 years. He understood control panels regardless of who made them. Power routing, emergency overrides, safety systems. His fingers flew across the interface, shutting down barriers and unlocking gates. Red was still fighting Gresh and losing ground. The arena master had reinforced armor and was systematically forcing the Ravager backward. Dennis found what he was looking for. The master control for all shock collars in the facility. A single button that would either free everyone or do nothing depending on whether it was really that simple. He slammed his fist down on it. Every collar in the arena complex deactivated simultaneously. Red's collar sparked and fell away, taking torn scales with it. The Ravager felt freedom from pain for the first time in years, and it showed in the renewed ferocity of its attacks. Below, in the holding cells, dozens of imprisoned creatures felt their collars go dead. The more intelligent ones understood immediately what had happened. They smashed their way out of weakened cages and rushed into the corridors. Roars and shrieks echoed through the complex as predators who had been enemies in the arena united against their common jailers. The guards broke and ran. You could not hold back that many angry creatures with shock weapons that no longer worked. Gresh realized his empire was collapsing around him. He made one desperate attempt to kill Dennis, abandoning his fight with Red to charge the control booth. Red caught the arena master from behind, all six limbs wrapping around his armored body. Gresh screamed orders that nobody followed anymore. His guards were fleeing. His spectators were rioting. His prisoners were free. Dennis did not watch what Red did to Gresh. He was already moving, bringing up the facility maps on the control systems. The docking bays were 3 levels above their current position. They needed a ship, and they needed it fast. He called down to Red and pointed the way. The Ravager released what remained of the arena master and bounded up the stairs to join its human. They ran through corridors filled with chaos. Freed creatures scattered in all directions, some seeking revenge, others simply fleeing to find their way home. Dennis and Red moved with purpose toward the docking bays. Guards who saw them coming stepped aside rather than fight. The human and the Ravager had become legends in a single afternoon. Nobody wanted to be the one who died trying to stop them. The docking bay held dozens of ships. Dennis picked a mid-sized transport that looked fast and well-maintained. The security locks were child's play compared to what he had just hacked in the control booth. The boarding ramp lowered, and Red followed him inside without hesitation. The cargo hold was large enough for the creature to move around comfortably. Dennis sealed them in and made his way to the cockpit. The control interface was unfamiliar, but the basics were universal. Thrusters, navigation, life support, weapons. He fired up the engines and felt them respond smoothly. Red positioned itself in the co-pilot area, too large for the seat, but fitting in the space available. Dennis programmed a jump to the nearest neutral system and engaged the autopilot. Then he finally let himself collapse into the pilot's chair. His body was a collection of bruises, cuts, burns, and one very nasty shoulder wound where the serpent had bitten him. Red was in similar condition, but they were alive. They were free. They had survived together, and in doing so had started something that would ripple across the galaxy. News of the arena's fall would spread. Other beings would hear the story of the human who did not conquer the predator but befriended it. That story would change how many species viewed humanity, not as warriors or conquerors, but as bridges between different forms of life. 3 months later, Dennis and Red stood on a planet the maps called Refuge 7, a remote world far from established trade routes where nobody asked questions. The sanctuary was small but growing. Creatures rescued from other fighting pits found their way here through underground networks. Dennis had become an unexpected advocate, speaking out against the blood sports that infected criminal sectors. Red remained by his side always, a living reminder that intelligence and compassion could be found in the most unexpected places. That a message came through on the communications array. Another fighting pit discovered. More creatures needing rescue. Dennis looked at Red and saw the determination in those multiple eyes. Neither of them had chosen this path, but both accepted it willingly. They boarded their ship together and lifted off into the night sky, heading toward whatever came next. The human pilot and his unlikely partner, proving every day that the strongest bonds were not forged in domination, but in mutual respect and shared freedom.